Hello, everyone. This week we are continuing with chapter one. So, we have already introduced some of the basic ideas we need for understanding aging sociologically. We talked about the difference between seeing aging primarily as a biological process and understanding aging as something that is also shaped by society. We also introduced the sociological imagination, which helps us connect individual experiences to larger social structures and historical circumstances. This week, our supplemental reading takes that idea one step further. Anne Barrett's article, Centering Age Inequality Developing a Sociology of Age Framework, asks us to think about something that seems very simple but is actually quite complicated. What does age mean sociologically? We tend to think of age as a number. Someone is 25, 45, 65, or 85. In research, age is often treated as a basic demographic characteristic, something that researchers include in their studies so they can compare different age groups. Barrett argues that sociology has often treated age this way without asking enough questions about what age itself actually does in society. In other words, we often use age to explain differences without asking how age becomes meaningful in the first place. This connects directly to the social construction of aging that we discussed in chapter one. Remember, saying that something is socially constructed does not mean that it is imaginary. People really do have different chronological ages, bodies really do change over time, but societies create meanings around those differences. We decide that certain ages are associated with particular roles, expectations, privileges, restrictions, or responsibilities. Think about something as ordinary as being considered old enough to drive, old enough to vote, old enough to drink alcohol, old enough to retire, or old enough to receive certain benefits. These age boundaries are created and maintained through social institutions. That means age can affect our opportunities and our relationships with other people. Barrett's argument is that this deserves to be studied as a form of inequality. We already understand that sociology studies systems of inequality based on things such as race, gender, and social class. Barrett asks us to give age similar theoretical attention. Age is not simply something that happens to us as individuals. It can also organize social relationships and distribute power and resources. One of the most important ideas in the article is that age inequality can operate at multiple levels. At the institutional level, organizations and social institutions establish age categories and expectations. At the interactional level, people respond to one another based on assumptions about age. And at the individual level, people develop identities and understandings of themselves in relation to age. So, age is not just something we have, it can become something that structures our social lives. This also helps us understand why the experience of being a particular age can vary so much from one person to another. Imagine two people who are both 70 years old. Chronologically, they are the same age, but they may have completely different experiences of what being 70 means. One person might be retired, financially comfortable, healthy, and living in a community where they have strong social connections. Another person might still be working because they cannot afford to retire, may have limited access to health care, and may live in a community with fewer resources. Their chronological ages are identical, but their social experiences of age are very different. This brings us back to the sociological imagination. Instead of looking at age as simply a number attached to an individual, we can ask what social structures give that number meaning. What does society expect from someone at a particular age? What opportunities become available? What opportunities disappear? What institutions treat people differently because of their age? And what happens when people do not behave according to the expectations associated with their age? Barrett's framework is especially useful because it encourages us to look at three interconnected areas: institutions, performances, and identities. Institutions establish rules and expectations around age. People also perform age through the ways they dress, behave, speak, and present themselves. And individuals develop identities in relation to their own age and to the expectations associated with being young, middle aged, or old. These processes can reinforce inequality. For example, if society repeatedly communicates that older adults are less capable, less productive, or less technologically competent, those assumptions can influence how older adults are treated by employers, healthcare providers, family members, and other institutions. Over time, those assumptions can also influence how people think about themselves. This is one reason that age inequality is different from simply being different ages. Age becomes sociologically significant when those differences are connected to power, resources, expectations, and opportunities. And this is where Barrett's argument connects so nicely with Powell's discussion in Chapter 1. Powell asks us to recognize that the meanings we attach to aging are socially constructed. Barrett asks us to take that idea further and recognize that the social construction of age can produce inequality. So we can move from one question to another. First, we ask, what does aging mean? Then we ask, who gets to define what aging means? And now we can ask, what happens when those definitions give some age groups more power, resources, or opportunities than others? That is the sociological study of age inequality. I want you to keep this idea in mind as you move through the rest of the course. We are going to continue seeing that age is connected to many other dimensions of social life, including race, gender, social class, sexuality, health, family, work, technology, and government policy. Age does not operate separately from these other social categories. Our experiences of aging are shaped by the combination of these factors and by the circumstances we encounter throughout our lives. So, as you finish this week's reading, I want you to think about your own assumptions about age. When do we decide that someone is young? When do we decide that someone is old? Who makes those decisions? And what happens to people when society's expectations about their age do not match who they actually are? Those questions will help us move from simply studying aging to thinking sociologically about age, inequality, and the social structures that shape our lives. This week, I want you to begin seeing age not simply as a number, but as something that has social meaning and social consequences.